I want to transition from what is motivation and our models of kind of thinking about motivation to some of the actual processes that organizations have found to be useful in generating motivation. Now, motivation itself in an organizational setting is almost always tied to goals. So one of the first things we want to talk about is goal setting theory. This is a theory that according to which goals serve as a motivator because it causes people to compare their present capacity to perform with the required to succeed the goal. So the idea of goal setting theory is one of the ways to actually generate motivation is to set clear goals. And think about again that model of kind of arousal. That first thing is recognizing a goal and wanting to attain it. So this is about making sure that organizations are making the goals for individual employees very clear. Some of the related concepts here is self-efficacy, one's belief about having the capacity to perform a task, and goal commitment, the degree to which people accept and strive to attain the goals. So when we're talking about goal setting theory, for goal setting theory to work, a couple of things have to be in place. One, the goal has to be presented in such a way that the person gets goal commitment. In other words, the person having the goal set wants to attain the goal. In other words, they're aroused by the goal. They want to move towards it. But we also want to be aware of self-efficacy. Does the person believe that they have the ability to perform the task? So if we set a goal that is extremely easy, for instance, yes, the self-efficacy is going to be there, but is it really that good of a goal to motivate someone? Probably not. I'm not going to be motivated to do a goal that is very easy to do. Take out the trash. I'll get to it eventually. That's not something I have a strong efficacy about it, but I don't necessarily have a strong goal commitment. I'm not really needing to strive to attain that goal. It's an easy goal. Likewise, if it's a very difficult goal, I may not have the self-efficacy. I may believe I'm not capable of attaining that goal. For instance, if someone said, you know what your goal should be? You should become the president of the United States. I'd be like, well, that sounds great, except I don't believe that I have the background, the political ties, or even the popularity or charisma necessary to go from never having served in office to going after one of the greatest offices in the United States. Therefore, again, my self-efficacy would be I might want to accept and strive towards that goal. It would be a cool thing to be, but at the same time, I seriously have self-efficacy issues. I don't believe that I have the capacity to get to that particular task. So when we're thinking about goal setting, that's the first two things I think anyone and any manager should consider. The goal should be something that is going to engage people. They want to attain it, they want to accept it, and you need to make sure that that's communicated clearly. But you also need to make sure that the goal is something that people believe that they have the capacity to perform. So that leads us to our how do we set effective goals? Assigning specific goals. People perform at higher levels when asked to meet specific high performance goals than when simply asked to do their best or when no goal is assigned at all. So that's the first thing, that we do find that motivation is more likely to be tied to performance in the face of specific, in other words, it's clearly identifiable what the goal is, and higher performance goals. So, and not impossible, but a challenging goal. That's when we tend to see an increase of performance tied to motivation. So we want to assign difficult but acceptable goals. They need to be either a vertical stretch goal or a horizontal stretch goal, rarely both. So a vertical stretch goal means that you're moving upwards and trying to do something you haven't done before. A horizontal stretch goal is something you've done before but might be at a greater capacity or with more responsibility. So, and also we want to make sure that if we're managing these goals, that we're providing feedback concerning goal attainment. Is the person's tasks and what they're actually doing to try to get to the goal, is it being successful? So all of those are important components about setting an effective goal. Because that's a lot to take in, and it is, when you're trying to manage someone through goal setting theory, deciding what the goal is, making sure they have the self-efficacy to complete the goal, making sure they're engaged and want to complete the goal, and then making sure that the goal itself is specific but difficult but not too difficult, that's a lot to kind of keep in mind. And therefore, there are some other theories that are just about creating an environment that naturally tends towards people being motivated towards goals. Job design is one of these. It's an approach to motivation suggesting that job can be created to enhance people's interest in doing them. In other words, We're not necessarily focusing on the goal itself. We're just focusing on creating the job in such a way that it makes people more motivated. And this generally takes two broad tacks. First is job enlargement, the practice of expanding the content of a job to include more variety and a greater number of tasks at the same level. In other words, we're talking about a horizontal load. So the person isn't necessarily taking on more responsibility, but they are getting more variety and a greater number of tasks at the level they're at and as the skill set they're at. So when we talk about job engagement, I should also make a note here that this is an effective technique for most people. Most people do enjoy having more variety and more tasks to do. In other words, their job is less boring. Also, with more variety usually comes a little bit more ownership in what's actually being done. At a very simple level, this might just be, for example, if we're looking at an assembly line. A job might be that a person comes in and for 8 hours they work the exact same machine for 8 hours solid, doing the exact same task at the exact same rate. A way to maybe enlarge that job is instead of that, we actually train them on 3 different machines and they work on one machine for 2.5 hours. They then switch forward to another machine and then they switch forward to another machine as the other workers also shift machines. Now, it is going to require a little bit more management and a little bit more training, but the people in that situation, most people will actually enjoy the variety. So that would be job enlargement. Now, I should make a note that there are some people, again, and we talked about this with Maslow's need hierarchy, that really are just looking at work as a quick exchange for the money that they need for those basic needs of physiological and safety needs. Those people are probably not going to like their job being enlarged because they aren't wanting to do more or have more responsibility. They're simply wanting to get their job done so they can go back to living their lives. So just be aware that there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all job theory or job intervention. And you do need to be aware of the environment and the workers you're working with before you try to just go forward with one of these ideas. The next one is job enrichment, the practice of giving an employee a higher degree of control over their work, from planning and organizing through implementing the job and evaluating the results. This is what we call vertically loaded. In other words, we're giving the person more empowerment and more control. Now, obviously, some jobs this is going to be more difficult. So for example, if a job was customer service rep, and currently the way it works is the customer service rep comes in, they start taking client calls, but there's a whole list of things that if the client is demanding, they don't have power over. They have to send it up to their manager. They have to send it up to their manager. The way we would enrich that job is to actually give them further training on reducing the number of things they have to send up to someone else. In other words, we're giving them control over their work. Instead of now having to say, I'm sorry, since you're asking for a refund without a receipt, I have to send you up to my manager, where the manager then makes that decision, making that decision a part of their job. That's vertically loading. Job characteristic model is another way to look at kind of changing the environment itself to increase motivation, and its approach to a job enrichment that specifies that there are 5 core job dimensions. So we're looking at just enrichment now, not enlargement. And those are skill variety, task identity, task significance, autonomy, and feedback. And that the higher you have on all 5 of these, it tends to produce critical psychological states that lead to beneficial outcomes for the individuals and the employees. And again, this does not work on everyone, but it does work on the majority of workers, especially when we're looking at more complex work. So the more that you are using a lot of your skills, the more that you can identify that the skills you're using actually result in productivity and the company's goals, that you can see the significance of the tasks that you do, that you have control over when and how you do them, and you get quick feedback of when you're succeeding and when you aren't. The more that that's true, the more likely, A, that you're going to be committed to that organization, B, that you're going to have high job satisfaction, and C, more likely that you will stay motivated. So let's break these down a little bit more into detail and discuss each one. So again, there's skill variety, the extent to which a job requires a number of different activities using several of the employee's skills and talents. So again, you can think about how this may vary from role to role. For example, if we're looking at an administrative assistant, the administrative assistant might be in a role where they're expected simply to sit, be a receptionist, and take calls, nothing else. There might be another person that's expected to just do the filing. Can that actually be expanded to where both of them are doing both jobs at different times? That's again employing more skills. And really what we're talking about in skill variety is what are the skills of the employee, and are they using all of their skill sets? The more of the skill set that they're using, the more likely they'll be motivated in their job. Task identity is the extent to which a job requires completing a whole piece of work from the beginning to end. In other words, task identity is I recognize how this task actually results in a product. This is something that's often missing in assembly lines, where someone is working on a single part of a single object, but they never actually see how it starts or even how it ends. So again, another my idea might this be is if all you do for reports is you fill in the tables. That's not task identity. You're just doing a small component. So the more that you can allow people to have ownership over the entirety of the task identity, again, the more motivating it is to complete that task. Task significance is the degree of impact the job is believed to have on others. So if you're actually working on something that you know will be used, know will have value, and know will be recognized by the customers of the company, you're more likely to see that as being a significant task. If you're working on something, even if you have task identity, but you think at the end of the day, this is going to go in a filing drawer somewhere and no one's going to look at it, that's low task significance. Autonomy is the extent to which employees have the freedom and discretion to plan, schedule, and carry out their jobs as desired. In other words, can they actually have the ability to prioritize? I've got 5 different competing tasks, but I'm going to choose which ones need to be done now, as long as I'm getting them done by their various deadlines. And finally, feedback, the extent to which the job allows people to have information about their effectiveness, their performance. Are they actually finding out as they're performing if it is good or bad performance? Another theory that we can use to look at how motivating a job is equity theory. This theory states that basically people strive to maintain ratios of their own outcomes to their own inputs that are equal to their outcomes and input ratios of others with whom they compare themselves. So it's the idea that you should get what you deserve, and you determine that by looking at what other people are doing. So basically, you are making a determination of how hard you're working versus what you're getting. So for example, I'm putting in 40 hours of work and I work hard and I'm getting this salary. And if you see that everyone else that works the same level of hardness as working as hard as you are is getting paid the same, then you probably feel equitable. It's equity. If you notice that some people are working much less than you but also making the same as you, that might actually be a problem with equity. Or if you notice people that are working are equal to you but are making more than you. So all of those are potential outcomes, and what we're really looking at is 2 parts of equity theory. The outcomes, the rewards employees receive for their job, such as salary and recognition, and the inputs, people's contributions to their job, such as their experience, qualifications, the amount of time worked. It's important to note that equity theory is not a rational theory. A rational theory is one that's based on basically objective and rational goals. In other words, if equity theory is a rational theory, we would perfectly measure the outcome versus the inputs, and that would tell us if someone's experienced equity or not. But equity is actually a subjective theory. It's your perception of your rewards and your perception of your output versus your perception of other people's rewards and your perception of their inputs as well. This is one of the reasons why a lot of organizational interventions focus on clear communication and being very forward with everyone in the organization about what the levels of expectations are, what the level of work expectations are, and even to some degree, what people are being paid. Pay transparency is a major concept that a lot of organizations are starting to struggle with, because that's part of the idea that if you don't actually know what other people are working, it's very easy for you to assume they're either making more or less. And if you think you work harder than someone that you assume is making more than you, that's a problem with equity theory. So equity theory basically has 3 comparable states. Overpayment inequity, a condition resulting in the feeling of guilt, in which the ratio of one's outcomes, inputs, is more than the corresponding ratio of other people with whom the person compares themselves. So overpayment in equity means that you recognize that the amount of work you're putting in is resulting in a better reward than the maybe more work that other people are putting in with a lesser reward. The next one is underpayment inequity, the condition resulting in feelings of anger in which the ratio of one's outcomes and inputs is less than the corresponding ratio of another person with whom we compare. So this is where I'm working harder but making less. It's my perception of everyone else. And what we're looking for is equitable payment, the state in which one person's outcome and input ratio is equivalent to another person with whom we're comparing. Now, with a lot of theories, there's a fair amount of support of this theory, but there's also some problems with this theory. And you may actually start to think, ask yourself, which of these make the most sense? Which of these make the least sense? From a rational viewpoint, they all make sense. But when we actually put it to the test, when we actually start measuring this in experiments, what we find is that the bottom two are highly predictive. If you perceive that your outcome and input is equivalent to everyone else, you're most likely to be more motivated. If you perceive that you're being underpaid, in other words, you think you're putting in more and getting out less than other people are, you're most likely to become less motivated. And by the way, it's not just motivation. This also impacts job satisfaction and organizational commitment. The top one, though, is not as supported. Generally speaking, people seem to be okay if they're making more for less. There's a little bit of evidence here, but it's a lot less convincing than the other categories. So again, why did we go over all these theories? These theories are ways for us to try to conceptualize the very complex concept of motivation in ways that make a certain amount of sense. So equity theory suggests that we simply try to make sure that we're communicating clearly that there isn't this misperception and that people are recognizing that they are getting paid equitably for what they do, as is everyone else at the level that they're at. And also making sure that if there's perceptions that some people make more, there's also an equal perception that that's because they have more responsibility and they may actually be involved in working harder at some different level. Just like goal setting theory is about how we set goals and how we need to think about how people are going to react to those goals. These are all just models to help us think through this process. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover about motivation in these audio slides. As always, if you have an individual question, feel free to email me, but also feel free to share any questions that you have on Canvas in the discussion session. That way the whole class can see, and I'll be responding to those daily as they come up. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next week.